Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. Today I'll talk about strange, opaque, and at times downright absurd differences between the Harry Potter films and the book. Enjoy watching. Number 1. Unjustified aggression. Let's start with one of the most discussed scenes in the entire wizarding world. I think many of you have already guessed. Yes, it's from The Goblet of Fire. And that legendary moment, "Harry, did you put your name in the goblet of fire?" This line has long become a meme. In the book, Dumbledore behaves calmly, almost philosophically, never raising his voice. But in the film, they were the exact opposite. He literally storms into the room, grabs Harry by the shoulders, and interrogates him with fury. For viewers who never read the books, the scene works dramatically, tense and emotional. But for fans, it's a shock. Book Dumbledore is the epitome of restraint and wisdom, calm even in the most critical situations. Here, instead of a kind mentor, we see a frustrated investigator. And though cinematically it heightens the drama in terms of character consistency, it's a complete break from the original. Number 2, Under the Blanket doesn't count. The Prisoner of Azkaban is one of the fans' all-time favorites. The tone grows darker, the heroes more mature, and the story deeper, but this very film contains perhaps the biggest continuity error in the entire franchise. The opening scene, Harry, under the blanket, casts Lumos Maxima, lighting up his book. A cute moment, a young wizard secretly practicing magic away from the Dursleys. But here's the problem. Where's the owl from the Ministry with the warning letter? Harry is using magic in a Muggle household. And in the wizarding world, the trace doesn't track people, but locations, which means the Ministry should have detected that spell instantly. In the book, things are very different. Harry really did study at night, but with a flashlight, not a wand. He wrote his summer essays and certainly didn't risk using magic in a house where he was barely tolerated. So the film takes liberties, though to be fair it's not so much an error as an attempt to create a pretty opening shot. After all, the audience must immediately see that this isn't just a boy, it's a wizard longing for his world. Number 3. Hermione got prettier. Hermione Granger, played by Emma Watson, became for many the perfect embodiment of the character. But let's be honest, the movies made her a bit more glamorous than J.K. Rowling ever intended. In the books, Hermione isn't described as a beauty, but as a bright, slightly awkward girl, with bushy hair and rather large front teeth. Draco Malfoy mocked her for it constantly. Quote from the book, "Do you think anyone would go with that filthy little mudblood with the buck teeth?" In her 4th year, Hermione becomes the victim of a spell, Densaugio, that makes her teeth grow rapidly until Madame Pomfrey intervenes. Hermione cleverly takes advantage of it. She has her teeth shortened a bit more than before and finally gets a straight smile. That moment doesn't appear in the films. In fact, Emma Watson was originally supposed to wear fake teeth, but the idea was dropped because it made her speech unclear. As a result, Hermione on screen turned out far more attractive than in the books, and her transformation at the Yule Ball in Goblet of Fire feels less dramatic. In the book, it's a revelation. In the film, just a pretty scene. Number 4, a love for metal. Now let's talk about appearances again, specifically Alastor Mad-Eye Moody, one of the most colourful auras in the wizarding world. His personality and backstory were portrayed well, but one detail went oddly wrong. In the book, Moody lost a leg and replaced it with a wooden prosthesis. Quote, Harry caught sight of a carved wooden leg ending in a clawed foot. But in the movie, that leg becomes metallic. Why? No explanation. Maybe the filmmakers thought a steel prosthetic would look cooler and underline his battle-hardened image. Still, it contradicts the spirit of the books, where the wooden leg symbolizes his connection to the old, almost primal magic, not technological prowess. It's rather ironic that in a world of flying brooms, mirrors, and magical doors, the filmmakers decided to sneak in a bit of steampunk. Number 5. A symbolic gesture. The finale of Deathly Hallows is the emotional peak of the entire saga. Harry defeats Voldemort and becomes the master of the Elder Wand, the most powerful magical artifact in existence. And what does he do? He just snaps it in half and throws it away. Beautiful, symbolic, decisive, but completely unlike the book. In Rowling's version, Harry acts much more wisely. He uses the Elder Wand to repair his old wand, like his beloved Holly and Phoenix feather wand, the one that accompanied him throughout his journey. Quote, "Reparo, and the Holly wand was whole again, red sparks flying from its tip." Then Harry decides to return the Elder Wand to Dumbledore's tomb, believing that if he dies naturally, its power will fade. This ending gives the story a deeper meaning. Harry doesn't just reject power. He closes the circle, returning the artifact to where it belongs. The film version, however, trades logic for drama. No wand, no relic, just empty hands. Symbolism wins over common sense. Number 6. Where is Percy? Percy Weasley's story in the books is one of pride, regret, and redemption. At first, he's the perfect ministry man, polished, ambitious, desperate to prove himself. When the ministry turns against Dumbledore and Harry, Percy sides with power, not family. "I'm embarrassed to be related to you," he tells his father, a line that shatters the warmth of the Weasley home. For years, he keeps his distance, sending cold letters while his family fights a war. It's painful because Percy isn't evil. He's blind and too proud to admit it. That's what makes his return so moving. During the Battle of Hogwarts, he bursts into the Great Hall, tears in his eyes, and says, "Let me fight with you." And for one fleeting hour, the family is whole again. Then Fred dies in his arms. Rowling writes, Percy was shaking his brother and Ron was kneeling beside them. It's devastating because it's too late. The films erase all of that. Percy appears briefly in the background, stripped of conflict or closure. There's no argument, no apology, no final reunion. The audience never sees the proud brother realizing the cost of his loyalty to the wrong side, never hears him beg forgiveness. Without that, the Weasley family loses one of its most powerful emotional arcs. Percy's story isn't just about politics. It's about the danger of ambition without love. The book makes you feel his shame and heartbreak. The films, sadly, make you forget he ever mattered. Number 7, Ginny, nothing like in the book. Book Ginny Weasley burns with confidence. She laughs loud, argues fiercely, and flies like lightning on a broomstick. By order of the Phoenix, she's no longer Ron's shy little sister. She's a force. When Harry hesitates to reopen Dumbledore's army, it's Ginny who snaps. "You don't have to keep saving the world all by yourself, you know." That's who she is in the books. Sharp, brave, unafraid to speak her mind. Her humour rivals Fred and George's, and her independence makes her magnetic. You see why Harry falls for her? She's his equal in fire and spirit. The films stripped that away. Screen Ginny barely speaks. Her relationship with Harry feels staged, not sparked. The infamous shoelace scene from Half-Blood Prince, where she kneels to tie Harry's shoe, is meant to be tender, but lands awkwardly. In the book, their first kiss erupts after a Quidditch victory, wild and joyful. Rowling writes, "Without thinking, without planning it, without worrying about the crowd, Harry kissed her." It's spontaneous, real, alive. The film turns that passion into silence. What was once a moment of triumph becomes an empty gesture. The result isn't romance, it's quiet confusion, a Ginny without her flame. Number 8. The Forgotten House Elves. In the films, house elves exist only in passing, a glimpse of Dobby's bravery and Creature's grumbling loyalty. But in the books they form an entire hidden world within the Wizarding Society. Rowling used them to explore injustice, prejudice, and the blindness of privilege. Hermione sees it first. Shocked by how elves are treated, she founds the Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare, or SPEW, determined to fight for their freedom even when everyone laughs. Ron calls it spew, Harry rolls his eyes, and the rest of Hogwarts treats it like a joke. But that's the point. Hermione stands alone for what she believes is right. One of the most touching scenes comes in Goblet of Fire, when she discovers the kitchens of Hogwarts. Hundreds of elves cook, clean, and serve, all hidden from sight. They like it, Ron insists. Hermione's face hardens. No one likes being enslaved, she says quietly. It's one of her defining moments, not magic, but morality. Through her, Rowling shows that heroism isn't only about fighting dark wizards, sometimes it's about fighting indifference. The films erased this completely. Without SPEW, Hermione loses a part of her soul, the part that fights for others even when it costs her friendships. It also makes her bond with Dobby shallower, because in the books she had spent years caring about elves before his death. Cutting that storyline simplified the world, but it also dulled its message. Magic wasn't just spells, it was empathy, and no one embodied that better than Hermione Granger. Number 9. The Theft from the Twins. In the films, Fred and George's shop, Weasley's Wizard Wheezes seems to appear out of nowhere, bright, loud, and already successful. There's no hint of how two mischievous pranksters managed to turn school jokes into a booming business in Diagon Alley. Viewers just accept it as comic relief between darker storylines, but in the books, their success has a heart behind it, and that heart is Harry. After winning the Triwizard Tournament, Harry receives 1,000 galleons in prize money. He doesn't keep it. Instead, he secretly gives it to Fred and George so they can start the shop they've dreamed of for years. Rowling describes the scene with a quiet tenderness. "Take it," Harry tells them. "Buy yourself a joke shop." The twins stare at him, stunned. He insists, smiling, "Just don't tell your mum." It's one of those small, intimate moments that define Harry's character far more than his battles ever could. He doesn't need thanks or recognition. He simply wants his friends to be happy, to chase their own kind of freedom. It's generosity without pride, and that's what makes it powerful. The films never showed this side of him. Without it, the twins' success loses its soul, and Harry's humanity feels thinner. The book gives us a boy who, even after facing death, chooses to share joy. The movie gives us only a hero with a scar. It's a subtle difference, but it's what turns a legend into a person. Number 10. Fleur without character. In the films, Fleur Delacour feels like decoration, graceful, elegant, and defined only by her accent. She enters the story in Goblet of Fire as the Beauxbatons champion, but her purpose seems limited to looking beautiful and acting slightly superior. The audience never learns what drives her or how fierce she truly is. Yet in the books, Fleur is fire wrapped in silk. She competes in the Triwizard Tournament not for fame, but to prove herself. To show that witches can be as brave as any wizard, Rowling describes her as beautiful but proud, a woman who refuses to be underestimated. The real Fleur shines in Half-Blood Prince. When Bill Weasley is attacked by the werewolf Fenrir Greyback, Mrs. Weasley assumes the wedding is off. In that moment, Fleur's response defines her character. "I think he is still beautiful," she says, her voice sharp with pride. "I am good-looking enough for both of us." It is one of the most powerful lines in the series, a declaration of love, loyalty, and courage. Through those few words, Fleur becomes more than a side character. She becomes a symbol of devotion. The film reduces this emotional scene to a passing comment. There's no spark in her eyes, no trembling voice, no sense of defiance. The tension between her and Mrs. Weasley, the prejudice she faces as too perfect, all disappear. By stripping her of her strength, the adaptation robs the audience of one of the saga's rare portraits of a woman who refuses to be defined by appearance. In the books, Fleur Delacour stands beside the Order during the darkest hours. She shelters fugitives, fights at the Battle of Hogwarts, and proves that elegance and heroism can coexist. On screen, she fades into the background, remembered only for her beauty. But the Fleur of the books burns brighter, strong, loyal, and unashamedly proud, a woman who loved not just with her heart, but with her will. Number 11. The Lavender Brown Casting Mystery. Lavender Brown's transformation on screen is one of the strangest casting mysteries in the Harry Potter films. In Prisoner of Azkaban and Goblet of Fire, Lavender was portrayed by a black actress. She appeared briefly sitting among Gryffindors during lessons, never drawing much attention. Then suddenly, in Half-Blood Prince, the role was recast. The new Lavender, played by Jessie Cave, was white, blonde, and loud, almost unrecognizable. It was as if the filmmakers had decided to rewrite her entirely, turning a background character into a romantic centerpiece, but only after changing her appearance. Fans noticed immediately. Social media and forums filled with questions. Why the change? There was no official explanation. J.K. Rowling never described Lavender's race in the books. She was simply a Gryffindor girl, known for her gossip and her fascination with divination. The switch felt unnecessary, even uncomfortable. Many fans argued that the studio had whitewashed the character once she was given a love story with Ron Weasley. It wasn't about the actress's talent, it was about what the choice seemed to imply. In the books, Lavender is more than a joke or a plot device. She's a teenage girl in love, fragile and dramatic, caught in the emotional storm of adolescence. When Ron is poisoned in Half-Blood Prince, Rowling writes, Lavender gave a wild scream of terror. It's a human moment, one that makes her relatable, but in the film, Lavender became a caricature, an exaggerated giggle, a shrill voice, a punchline. The irony is that by changing how she looked, the films also changed who she was. Imagine if the original actress had stayed. The story of Ron and Lavender might have felt fresher, less formulaic. It could have shown that love and teenage emotion aren't limited to one image of beauty. Instead, the filmmakers chose the safer, more conventional path. What could have been a bold and inclusive moment in the series became a reminder of how even a magical world sometimes mirrors the narrow choices of our own. Number 12. The Missing Death Scene. The death of Remus Lupin and Nymphadora Tonks was one of the most heartbreaking moments in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. In the book, J.K. Rowling gives us a quiet, devastating scene. After the battle, Harry walks through the Great Hall and suddenly sees them, side by side, pale and still. The words are simple, but they cut deep. Lupin's hand was resting on Tonks's as though in sleep. In that instant, Harry realizes that their newborn son, Teddy, will grow up without parents, just like he did. The circle of loss closes, and the pain becomes generational. In the film, This moment is barely there. The camera passes over their bodies for just a second. No dialogue, no music to stop your breath, no moment of realization for Harry. If you blink, you miss it entirely. Viewers who didn't read the books might not even understand that two beloved characters just died. It feels like the film turned a chapter of grief into a background decoration. In the book, Lupin's death had meaning. He was the last of the marauders, the last link to Harry's father, and his loss symbolized the end of that generation. When he asks Harry earlier in the story to be Teddy's godfather, it feels like hope, a promise of life beyond war. That promise dies with him. The book makes you feel that. The movie doesn't. Even a short scene could have changed everything. Imagine Lupin and Tonks reaching for each other's hands one last time before the battle. Imagine Harry kneeling beside them afterward, realizing he's now the one who must carry their legacy. It would have taken only seconds, but those seconds would have honored two heroes who fought, loved, and died so that others could live. Number 13, the true role of Draco. Draco Malfoy in the Harry Potter films is remembered by most viewers as the archetypal school bully, elegant, cruel, sneering, and confident in his superiority. But J.K. Rowling's books paint a far more intricate portrait. The Draco of the novels is not merely arrogant. He is a boy trapped between inherited beliefs and a conscience that refuses to die. His arrogance masks fear, and his cruelty is often the result of pressure rather than pleasure. The cinematic version flattens this complexity, simplifying him into a convenient antagonist. Yet on the page, Rowling gives him dimension, depth, and, ultimately, tragedy. Draco is one of the most human figures in the saga, a boy standing at the edge of darkness, forced to choose between survival and his soul. In the films, Draco's smug expression, slick hair, and constant insults make him seem like a caricature of Slytherin arrogance. But in the books, every insult he utters carries a layer of desperation. His upbringing under Lucius Malfoy's iron control taught him to despise weakness and worship blood purity. Still, Rowling hints that this ideology never fully took root in Draco's heart. As early as the Chamber of Secrets, when Hermione is called a mudblood, Draco's insult shocks even his own friends. Rowling writes that Malfoy looked pleased with himself, but the pleasure is fleeting. He repeats the words of his father, not his own convictions. This early moment reveals a child mimicking the world he was born into, a parrot of inherited hatred, not a true believer. By the time we reach the Half-Blood Prince, Draco's facade begins to crumble. The boy who once taunted others from the safety of his gang now walks alone, isolated by the secret mission given to him by Voldemort. Rowling's writing captures the suffocating weight of his burden. He had never looked more terrified. These words, brief yet powerful, appear when Harry spies on Draco crying in the bathroom. The image of Draco, shoulders shaking in fear, contrasts violently with the proud image seen in previous books. It is here that we see the truth. Draco Malfoy, the so-called villain, is just a 16-year-old boy being crushed by expectations he never asked for. The films, however, give this scene only a fragment of its emotional power. The bathroom confrontation between Harry and Draco in Half-Blood Prince passes quickly, losing the tension and vulnerability of the novel. In the book, Harry's spell, Sectum Sempra, leaves Draco bleeding and terrified, and the reader feels genuine horror. Draco becomes a symbol of the consequences of hatred, both his own and Harry's. Rowling does not allow him to remain a caricature. She forces us to see the damage on both sides. In contrast, the film rushes through the moment, treating it as just another magical duel. The camera lingers on Harry's guilt, but barely shows Draco's trauma. What could have been one of the most emotionally charged scenes in the series becomes a visual aside stripped of its meaning. The real tragedy of Draco lies in the Half-Blood Prince's climax, where he is ordered to kill Albus Dumbledore. In the film, Tom Felton's expression captures fear and hesitation, but the screenplay robs the moment of depth. In the book, Rowling gives us a raw glimpse into Draco's soul. Dumbledore speaks softly to him, saying, "You are not a killer." And indeed, Draco is not. Rowling describes his trembling hands, his tear-streaked face, his broken voice as he admits, "He'll kill me." These words reveal not defiance but terror, the terror of a child who has realized that obedience to evil offers no protection. When he lowers his wand, it is the first true act of courage we see from him. Yet the film reduces it to a brief standoff, never allowing viewers to feel the moral earthquake that takes place inside the boy. What the movies fail to convey is the slow unraveling of Draco's identity. In the books, every appearance of his in Half-Blood Prince adds a new layer to his inner collapse. Rowling shows us his pale face, the dark circles under his eyes, the way he avoids his friends. Even Pansy Parkinson, usually adoring, begins to worry about him. "He's not himself lately," she whispers in the background. These subtle moments illustrate how isolation eats away at Draco. He is no longer a schoolyard tyrant. He is a ghost wandering the castle halls, haunted by the task that will destroy him. By the time Deathly Hallows begins, Draco has become a prisoner in his own home. Malfoy Manor, once a symbol of pride, turns into a cage. Voldemort uses it as his headquarters, and the family that once served him with devotion now lives in constant fear. Rowling writes, Draco's pale, pointed face was twisted with anxiety. He is present during horrific scenes, such as when the Death Eaters torture others in his house. Yet he does nothing. Some see cowardice, others see paralysis. His silence is the silence of a boy who has realized too late that evil devours its followers first. The films treat this period with almost no psychological context. When Draco hesitates to identify Harry at Malfoy Manor, moviegoers might see only confusion, but in the book this hesitation is monumental. Rowling describes how his mouth opened but no sound came out. That moment of silence is not hesitation, it is rebellion. It is the closest Draco comes to defying Voldemort, refusing, however subtly, to condemn another to death. For readers, it is redemption in miniature, a flicker of the boy he might have been if someone had shown him mercy. Number 14, the missing potion riddle. When the trio stepped into the underground chambers beneath Hogwarts, the air felt thick with enchantments and danger. Every trial they had faced so far, Fluffy, the Devil's Snare, the Flying Keys, and the enchanted chessboard, had demanded courage, teamwork, and a certain kind of brilliance. Yet, as readers of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone know, one final test awaited them, and it wasn't about bravery or magic, it was about logic. In that small, dimly lit chamber, lined with flickering purple flames, Hermione Granger, so often labelled the know-it-all of the trio, faced a challenge that no wand could solve. This scene, found in the book but mysteriously erased from the film, stands as one of the most telling omissions in the adaptation. The logical riddle of the potions was more than just an obstacle. It was a moment that redefined Hermione's character, showing her not merely as an academic overachiever, but as someone whose intellect could rival the mightiest magic. The test consisted of 7 bottles lined up on a table, each containing a potion, some deadly, one that would allow the drinker to go forward, and another to return safely through the flames. The rest were tricks and poisons. Hermione had to use a short poem of clues to determine which bottle was which. It wasn't magic that would save them. It was reason. And that was the beauty of it. Rowling's description of that moment is strikingly deliberate. She writes, "It's not magic, it's logic," said Hermione. "A lot of the greatest wizards haven't got an ounce of logic." That single line is a direct challenge to the magical world's obsession with power and spells. Through Hermione, Rowling reminded her readers that intellect, reasoning, and calm thinking under pressure could be as powerful as a wand. The test wasn't about incantations or courage, it was about clarity of mind. It was, in essence, Hermione's battlefield, just as the chessboard was Ron's, and the confrontation with Voldemort was Harry's. Yet when audiences watched the film adaptation, this crucial scene was gone. The movie rushed from the chess match straight to the final chamber with Professor Quirrell and the mirror of Erised. Hermione's greatest test, her moment of rational triumph, was erased. To a casual viewer, it might seem like a small omission, but to anyone who knows the books, it is a loss that changes the entire balance of the trio's dynamic. Without it, Hermione's role becomes secondary, almost diminished to the archetype of the smart friend who tags along rather than the essential pillar of the group. In the book, the sequence of trials is a careful narrative design, with each character facing a challenge that highlights their defining trait. Harry's courage, Ron's strategic mind, and Hermione's intellect all converge to complete the journey. When Ron sacrifices himself on the chessboard, readers are left in awe of his bravery and quick thinking. When Hermione solves the riddle, readers see that her intelligence is not merely about memorizing spells or knowing facts. It is about applying reason in a world that often glorifies emotion and instinct. Her calm deduction in that firelit room contrasts sharply with the chaos surrounding them, underscoring that sometimes survival depends not on strength, but on thought. The omission of this scene in the film flattens Hermione's complexity. The movie gives us the impression that her primary function is to identify magical plants and recite spells. We see her paralyzed by fear in the Devil's Snare, relying on Harry to remind her to use her wand. But the logical riddle would have reversed that dynamic. It was her chance to lead, to be the hero for a moment. By cutting it, the filmmakers inadvertently weakened the message that the Philosopher's Stone carries about the equal value of intellect, courage, and friendship. In Rowling's story, this balance was deliberate. Each member of the trio symbolizes a different aspect of heroism. Harry represents heart and moral strength. Ron represents loyalty and sacrifice. Hermione represents intellect and reason. Remove one of those and the trio loses its harmony. It's no accident that Rowling placed the riddle right after Ron's sacrifice. It allowed Hermione to take the torch literally and metaphorically, showing that each of them contributes something irreplaceable. In that sense, the logical test was the transition point between Ron's bravery and Harry's destiny. The potion riddle also served as a subtle piece of world building. It reminded readers that Hogwarts was not just a place of magic, but also of learning. One of the potions allowed passage forward, one backward, and several brought death. The clues themselves demanded pure logic. First, however slyly the poison tries to hide, you will always find some on Nettlewine's left side. There was no spell, no magical intuition that could help. It was cold reasoning, something that the magical world often underestimated. In a way, the challenge foreshadowed the later themes of the series where knowledge, analysis, and research become essential weapons against the darkness. Hermione's victory in that chamber was also symbolic of her role as a Muggle-born witch. In a society that often looked down on those without wizarding ancestry, She proved that the mind, not the blood, defines a great wizard. Her triumph through logic rather than magic was a quiet rebellion against the prejudice of that world. When she said, "A lot of the greatest wizards haven't got an ounce of logic," it wasn't just an observation. It was a subtle critique of the elitism within the wizarding community. The scene gave her a moral and intellectual weight that the film never quite replicated. Number 15, Neville's tragic family. Draco Malfoy was never meant to be a true villain. In the books, he is a mirror, one that reflects what happens when fear outweighs courage, when family pride replaces moral conviction. Yet the films chose a simpler image. Tom Felton's Draco was pale, sneering, confident to the point of arrogance. A school bully, not a boy collapsing under the weight of impossible expectations. The tragedy of Draco Malfoy was never that he was evil, it was that he was too afraid not to be. Rowling painted him in shades of grey, while the movies flattened those colours into a single note of superiority. From the very beginning, Rowling gave readers subtle glimpses into Draco's upbringing. His arrogance was not born, it was taught. In the Chamber of Secrets, Lucius Malfoy hands him a copy of the Daily Prophet and sneers at Arthur Weasley's fascination with muggles. Draco absorbs that contempt like a sponge. "You'll soon find out that some wizarding families are much better than others, Potter," he boasts on the Hogwarts Express. But in the book, that line isn't just pride, it's insecurity. Rowling's tone shows how much Draco craves validation. Every insult hides the desperation to please his father, to be the perfect Malfoy. By the 6th book, The Half-Blood Prince, that childish arrogance begins to crack. The task Voldemort gives him, murdering Albus Dumbledore, is not a test of loyalty but of cruelty. The films turn it into a brief subplot, a shadow among many. But in the book, it is the spine of Draco's story. The reader sees him pacing the corridors, trembling, his skin turning grey. Rowling writes, "He was very pale and gaunt, with dark shadows under his eyes. There were tiny beads of sweat breaking out on his forehead. This isn't the portrait of a proud Death Eater. It's the portrait of a child trapped in a nightmare of adults' making." Every act of Draco's sabotage in Half-Blood Prince feels desperate, clumsy, and terrified. He repairs the vanishing cabinet in the Room of Requirement, not out of zeal for Voldemort's cause, but from a frantic desire to save his family from punishment. The films show him tinkering silently, emotionlessly, but the book's version is haunting. Rowling describes him bursting into tears in a deserted bathroom, unable to contain the guilt and terror. When Harry confronts him there, Draco's panic explodes. "You're not so brave now, are you, Potter?" he says, but Rowling notes that his voice is shaking. It's not a threat, it's a plea for control. That moment when Harry casts Sectum Sempra changes everything. The sight of Draco bleeding on the bathroom floor is one of the few times Harry truly regrets using dark magic. In the movie, the scene is shot quickly without the emotional gravity that made it so unforgettable in print. In the book, Harry freezes as blood pools beneath Draco. There was a great gash across Malfoy's chest. He was screaming and writhing, his face contorted in pain. When Snape rushes in to heal him, Draco's vulnerability is total. It's the first time the reader truly sees him as a victim, not a rival. This transformation is crucial because it reframes everything that comes later. By the time Draco stands in the astronomy tower with his wand trembling at Dumbledore, the boy who once mocked others for weakness becomes its embodiment. "No one can help me," he whispers in the book. "I've got to do it. He'll kill me." It's one of the most revealing lines Rowling ever gave him. Raw, desperate, almost childlike. Dumbledore's calm response, telling him that no one has to do anything, becomes a lifeline that Draco is too scared to grasp. The films, however, strip this down to a brief standoff with no real emotional contrast. Felton's Draco looks afraid, yes, but the audience never feels the suffocating dread that the book radiates on every page. Rowling didn't intend Draco to be redeemed easily, but she wanted readers to understand him. In later interviews, she called him the boy who had all the wrong influences but might have been something else if someone had reached out sooner. The cinematic Draco, reduced to smirks and sharp suits, lost that complexity. The fear of Voldemort's wrath, the suffocating pressure from Lucius and Narcissa, the horror of realizing what serving the Dark Lord actually meant, all of it vanished in favor of quick visual drama. Even in Deathly Hallows, where Draco's internal conflict reaches its peak, the movies only brush against his turmoil. In the book, when the trio is captured and taken to Malfoy Manor, Draco hesitates to identify Harry. "I don't know," he mutters, refusing to confirm what's obvious. That line carries more courage than any duel. It's his quiet rebellion, his refusal to sentence someone to death again. But in the film, the hesitation lasts barely a second, and the emotional weight of that moral stand is lost. The book's Draco, trembling and hollow-eyed, still manages an act of mercy. The film's Draco simply looks uncertain. Later, during the final battle, Rowling's Draco does not fight for Voldemort or for Harry. He runs, not from cowardice, but because he is done being anyone's pawn. His mother, Narcissa, becomes the family's moral anchor when she lies to Voldemort about Harry's death. That lie, born of maternal love, saves not only Harry, but Draco's soul. It's Rowling's quiet statement that redemption in her world doesn't always come from wands and battles. It can come from a single, human decision to choose love over fear. Number 16, The Vanishing of Peeves. When the trio stepped through the trapdoor into the dark, hidden chambers beneath Hogwarts, each trial they faced was meant to test a different kind of strength. In the film version of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, the sequence is thrilling but incomplete, a simplified version of what J.K. Rowling originally wrote. It presents a series of magical challenges, yes, but it quietly removes one of the most revealing tests in the entire story. The potions riddle, the test of pure logic. This omission changed not just the pacing of the film, but also the balance of power within the trio itself. It was the scene that proved Hermione Granger was more than just the clever student with a good memory. It was the scene that crowned her as the mind of the group, the equal of both Harry's courage and Ron's instinct. In the book, after surviving the deadly devil's snare, the enchanted keys, and the dangerous life-size chess game, the trio is bruised, breathless, but determined. Ron Weasley, the chess strategist, sacrifices himself so that the others may go on. Harry and Hermione continue forward, thinking Ron will be safe until they return. What follows is one of the most atmospheric scenes in the first novel. A narrow stone passageway lit only by blue flames, a table filled with 7 glass bottles of varying shapes and colors, and a black fire blocking the exit. It is not a duel, not a monster, not even a spell. It is a puzzle. It's a logic problem, Hermione realizes, her voice trembling, not from fear, but from excitement. A lot of the greatest wizards haven't got an ounce of logic. In those few words, Rowling captures Hermione's essence better than any spell could. The riddle itself is a masterpiece of tension and intellect. A small scroll rests on the table beside the bottles. On it, a poem written in neat black ink gives a series of clues. One bottle will let the drinker go safely through the black flames to the final chamber. Another will send the drinker back through the purple fire to safety, and several more are deadly poisons. The rest are harmless wine. There are no wands, no incantations, no magical creatures, only observation, reasoning, and logic stand between them and the stone. Hermione studies the bottles and the poem for several minutes, while Harry waits, helpless to assist. She is solving a riddle that requires absolute precision because one wrong sip could mean death. Finally, she announces her conclusion with quiet confidence. The smallest bottle will take Harry forward to face whatever lies ahead, while she herself will drink the potion that sends her back. This moment is not just a show of intelligence, it is the culmination of Hermione's growth through the first book. She began as the girl who corrected others' pronunciation of Wingardium Leviosa, who lived by rules and feared breaking them. But here she acts bravely and decisively, using her own intellect as a weapon. Rowling deliberately crafted this trial to demonstrate that the trio's strengths, Harry's bravery, Ron's strategy, and Hermione's intellect, are all equally essential. The scene is quiet even still, yet it carries more weight than many of the grand battles that came later in the series. It is the moment where Hermione's mind becomes as heroic as Harry's courage. When the filmmakers adapted this story, they kept almost all of the earlier obstacles, the devil's snare that Hermione escapes by remembering her herbology lessons, the flying keys that Harry catches on his broom, and Ron's heroic chess move that knocks him unconscious. But once Ron falls and Harry and Hermione move forward, the film cuts directly to the final chamber with Professor Quirrell and the Mirror of Erised. The entire logic puzzle, the eerie table of potions, the flames, the parchment with the riddle, disappears completely. The effect is subtle but significant. The movie gives the impression that the trials end with Ron's chess sacrifice and that Harry, not Hermione, does the rest. The audience never sees the one test that relies not on magic or bravery, but on intellect. That deletion altered the dynamic between the three characters. In the book, Hermione has the final moment of triumph before Harry faces Quirrell. She becomes, in a sense, the last guardian of reason before Harry's moral test. She proves that her mind, not her wand, can unlock the mysteries of the wizarding world. Without that scene, moviegoers saw a Hermione who was brilliant in the classroom but secondary in the adventure. It was as if the filmmakers decided that action and visual danger were more cinematic than logic and thought. But that choice stripped Hermione of her most defining act in the story, the one that elevated her from the clever girl to the essential partner. The irony is that the potion riddle could have been an extraordinary cinematic moment. Imagine the flicker of firelight reflecting off glass bottles, the eerie silence in the underground chamber, the slow realization that one wrong choice could kill them both. Instead of a quick transition, it could have been a moment of breath-holding suspense, one that allowed Hermione's reasoning to take center stage. "It's not magic," she says in the book. "It's logic." That single line, absent from the film, contains one of the story's most profound lessons. Intelligence can be a form of heroism. Rowling used the scene not just as a test for Hermione, but as a commentary on the wizarding world itself. Throughout the series, wizards are often portrayed as dismissive of logic and science. They rely on charms and intuition, not analysis. Hermione, raised in the Muggle world, brings a rational, disciplined mind to a society that sometimes confuses cleverness with wisdom. The potion riddle embodies that clash of worlds. It shows that being a great wizard is not only about mastering spells, but also about understanding patterns and making careful decisions. It's a subtle but powerful message, one that gets lost when the story is reduced to action sequences. The decision to remove the scene also weakened the story's symbolic symmetry. Each member of the trio had a challenge that represented their personal strength. Ron's strategic thinking in the chess game, Harry's courage in facing Quirrell, and Hermione's intellect in the riddle. The book presents them as a perfect triad, heart, mind, and soul working together. The film, however, breaks that pattern. Ron's moment remains, Harry's climax remains, but Hermione's intellectual trial vanishes. Her brilliance is acknowledged in dialogue, but not proven through action. This subtle change has shaped how generations of movie-only fans perceive her, as the supportive brain, not the independent hero. Fans who grew up with the films often describe Hermione as the smart one or the sidekick, but readers of the books know she was far more. The potion riddle is the moment when she earns the right to stand beside Harry as an equal. It's when her logical reasoning saves them just as surely as any spell. Rowling even reinforces this later in the series. In the Deathly Hallows, Hermione's quick thinking with enchantments and planning repeatedly saves Harry's life. Those moments trace their lineage back to the underground chamber where she proved that knowledge and reasoning could conquer fear. The exclusion of the riddle also distorts Harry's journey. In the book, he moves from relying on others to facing evil alone. Hermione's analytical mind guides him up to the threshold, but once he drinks the potion, he must confront Quirrell without her. The transition is clear. Logic and intellect can prepare him, but only moral courage can defeat the darkness. Without that progression, the film version rushes the emotional arc. It jumps straight from action to climax, skipping the quiet breath before the storm. The moment where thought meets bravery. There is also something deeply poetic about Hermione's act of sending Harry forward while she returns. It mirrors their later destinies. Harry will go on to face danger and death, while Hermione will often retreat to gather knowledge and understanding. The potion riddle becomes a microcosm of their friendship, trust, sacrifice, and mutual respect. By removing it, the film loses one of the earliest hints of that profound bond. Hermione does not just solve the puzzle, she entrusts Harry with the future, knowing her role has been fulfilled. It's not submission, it's partnership. What's remarkable is that Rowling never framed Hermione's logic as emotionless intellect. She infuses it with empathy. When she chooses to stay behind, she trembles and admits that she admires Harry's bravery. The line, "Books and cleverness, there are more important things of friendship and bravery and, oh, Harry, be careful," captures her evolution perfectly. She recognizes that intellect alone is not enough. The filmmakers kept this line but severed it from the riddle that gave it meaning. Without the preceding puzzle, the emotional weight of that confession is diluted. It becomes a sentimental farewell rather than a revelation of character. In that sense, the missing potion test is more than a deleted scene. It's a missing idea. It represents the theme that runs quietly through the entire series, that different forms of strength must coexist. The magical world is not saved by wands alone, but by courage, intelligence, and compassion working together. The riddle is the clearest early demonstration of this philosophy. When Hermione faces the bottles, she embodies logic, guided by loyalty. When Harry steps through the flames, he embodies bravery, guided by faith. Together they form the moral geometry of the story. Every adaptation simplifies, but this simplification carried a cost. The film traded quiet brilliance for spectacle, reflection for movement. The loss might seem small, with a single room, a few lines, a puzzle never seen. Yet it reshaped how millions perceived a central character. The book allowed Hermione to stand as the rational heart of the trio, while the film pushed her slightly to the side. The difference between those two portrayals is the difference between a thinker and a helper, between an equal and a companion. And so when readers return to the pages of the Philosopher's Stone, they rediscover a version of Hermione that the screen never fully captured. She is the girl who looks at 7 bottles, deciphers a deadly riddle, and proves that logic, when joined with courage, can conquer even the darkest flames. It's not a grand duel or a flash of magic, it's the quiet triumph of reason. And in that quiet moment beneath Hogwarts, she earns her place not behind Harry, but beside him, where she was always meant to be. Number 17, Snape's Lost Past. Neville Longbottom's journey through the Harry Potter saga is one of the most profound and quietly heroic transformations in modern fantasy, yet the films reduce his complexity to a mere shadow of the boy who emerged from tragedy. In J.K. Rowling's books, Neville's story is not just about courage, it is about grief, trauma, and the quiet endurance of someone who carries the weight of a broken family. The films show him as clumsy, nervous, and eventually brave, but they never explain the source of his pain, nor the remarkable reason behind his unyielding spirit. To understand Neville is to see him not as comic relief, but as the boy who could have been Harry Potter himself, and as the child of 2 heroes destroyed by the same evil that shaped the entire wizarding world. In the books, Rowling paints Neville's backstory with haunting precision. His parents, Frank and Alice Longbottom, were Aurors, elite fighters in the First War against Voldemort. They were brave, brilliant, and respected members of the Order of the Phoenix. Yet their fate was cruel beyond words. After Voldemort's first downfall, several Death Eaters, including Bellatrix Lestrange, her husband Rodolphus, and Barty Crouch Jr., captured the Longbottoms and subjected them to prolonged torture, using the Cruciatus Curse. Rowling does not describe the event in detail, but its aftermath is devastating. "They are insane," she writes in Order of the Phoenix, when Neville's grandmother finally reveals the truth. They were tortured into madness by Bellatrix Lestrange and her friends. Those words transform Neville from an awkward background character into one of the most tragic figures of the series. The films, however, never show this scene, nor even mention it in passing. For moviegoers, Neville is simply a bumbling Gryffindor who gradually grows a spine. But the reason for his early clumsiness, his self-doubt, his trembling hands, his desperate need to prove himself, lies in that unspoken past. He is the boy raised not by loving parents, but by a stern grandmother who demanded that he live up to a legacy of courage he could never fully understand. The shadow of that expectation follows him from the first book to the last, and in the novels we feel it in every insecure thought and every hesitant action. One of the most heartbreaking moments in the series takes place in Order of the Phoenix, when Harry and his friends accidentally encounter Neville at St. Mungo's Hospital for magical maladies and injuries. It is a quiet, tender scene that reveals everything the films left behind. Neville's parents live there permanently, their minds shattered beyond repair. His mother no longer recognizes him, but she still shuffles toward him and presses a small, crumpled wrapper from a Drubel's best-blowing gum into his hand. Neville quietly accepts it and slips it into his pocket. He does not throw it away. This tiny gesture, a simple exchange of meaningless paper, becomes one of the most powerful moments in the entire saga. Rowling's description is painfully gentle. His mother had come over to him. She did not seem to recognize him. She was smiling. She pressed a gum wrapper into his hand. "Thanks, Mum," said Neville quietly, pocketing it. There is no need for explanation. The scene tells us everything about Neville's character. He does not resent his mother, he does not flinch or pull away. he treasures what little connection he has left, and he carries it with dignity. That small wrapper is a symbol of his love and the emotional resilience that defines him far more than any act of bravery on the battlefield. Without this scene, the Neville of the films feels incomplete. We never understand why he is so timid at first, or why his fear runs deeper than simple shyness. In the books, every time Professor Snape humiliates him, or when he struggles to master a spell, it is not just about incompetence, it is about trauma. He is a boy constantly told he will never live up to his father's memory, a child whose every failure seems to confirm that he is not good enough to bear the Longbottom name. "It's not my fault," he once says to Harry, after being reminded of his parents' suffering, "but sometimes I feel it is." That unspoken guilt defines his early years, and it makes his eventual courage all the more remarkable. In the films, the narrative rushes to his redemption in the final battle, portraying him as the surprise hero who kills Nagini. While that moment is undeniably powerful, it loses emotional depth without the foundation of his pain. In Rowling's world, Neville's act is not sudden. It is the culmination of years of silent endurance. He has faced darkness his entire life, not the external evil of Voldemort, but the daily sorrow of visiting parents who no longer know his name. When he stands against Voldemort's army, he is not becoming brave. He is finally allowing the courage that has always lived within him to surface. The omission of the Saint Mungo's scene also deprives viewers of understanding the true cost of the Wizarding Wars. Through Neville's parents, Rowling reminds us that victory over Voldemort came at a terrible price. Not all heroes die in battle. Some live on, broken, forgotten, and confined to hospital beds. Alice and Frank Longbottom are symbols of sacrifice, and their absence in the films softens the reality of what the fight against evil truly demanded. It also weakens the contrast between Neville and Harry. Both boys were nearly chosen as the chosen one, both born in July to parents who defied Voldemort 3 times. The only difference was that Voldemort marked Harry instead. Without understanding Neville's suffering, the audience cannot fully grasp how thin the line was between the two destinies. Even Dumbledore himself acknowledges this haunting connection in Order of the Phoenix. "The odd thing, Harry," he tells him, "is that it might have been Neville." That revelation redefines Neville's entire arc. He could have been the boy destined to defeat the Dark Lord, but instead he became something equally extraordinary, the boy who chose to keep fighting without destiny's blessing, without prophecy, without fame. The films, in their rush for visual drama, never pause to show the depth of that parallel. The books also show how Neville's pain transforms him into one of Hogwarts' quiet protectors. In Deathly Hallows, when Harry, Ron, and Hermione return to the castle, they find that Neville has become the leader of Dumbledore's army, organizing resistance against the Carrows, who terrorize students in their absence. He hides in the Room of Requirement, scarred and bruised, but still unbroken. They use the Cruciatus curse on kids just for doing homework wrong, he tells them. That line carries immense weight when we remember that his own parents were destroyed by the same curse. Neville's defiance is not born of rash bravery, it is deeply personal. This depth makes his confrontation with Voldemort at the Battle of Hogwarts one of the most poetic moments in the series. When he stands before the Dark Lord holding the sorting hat and refusing to kneel, we are witnessing the completion of a long, painful transformation. He is the boy who once trembled before Snape, now staring into the face of the man responsible for his parents' madness. And when he draws the sword of Gryffindor from the hat and slays Nagini, he symbolically avenges them. Rowling gives us a full-circle moment of justice that resonates precisely because we understand where his strength comes from. In the films, this climax exists, but it lacks the same soul. There is no emotional connection between Neville's heroism and his past. Without the memory of Alice's trembling hands or Frank's vacant eyes, his triumph becomes just another action scene. The film audience cheers for his bravery, but the reader weeps for his redemption. What was supposed to be the resolution of a lifetime of quiet pain becomes simply a cinematic surprise. The tragedy of the adaptation is that Neville's story is the heart of what Rowling's world represents. The idea that true bravery is born not in glory, but in suffering. Harry's courage is visible and celebrated, but Neville's is quiet, private, and deeply human. He teaches us that heroism can exist in the smallest acts of love, in saving a gum wrapper, in standing up to friends, in refusing to give up on hope. By cutting his family's story, the films lost one of the most human lessons in the entire saga. Every time readers revisit that hospital corridor in Order of the Phoenix, where Neville's mother wordlessly hands him another candy wrapper, they understand the man he becomes at Hogwarts gates. It is not magic that shapes him, it is memory. The strength that allows him to face death itself comes from those silent visits from the boy who never stopped loving parents who could not love him back in the same way. That is the Neville Longbottom the books gave us, and the one the films forgot to show. Number 18. Fred and George without Hogwarts. Few movie adaptations cut a character as symbolic and vibrant as Peeves the Poltergeist. In J.K. Rowling's books, Peeves is not merely a mischievous ghost, he is the spirit of Hogwarts itself, a living embodiment of the school's chaotic humour and unpredictable magic. Yet for millions who only watched the films, his existence is completely unknown. The cinematic Hogwarts, though grand and beautiful, feels quieter and strangely sterile compared to the one in the books. And the reason for that silence is the absence of the castle's loudest voice, the shrieking laughter of Peeves. Peeves first appears in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, swooping through corridors, throwing chalk, and taunting students with rhymes. Rowling describes him vividly. Peeves the Poltergeist was floating upside down in mid-air, clutching the end of a broomstick and writing rude words on the ceiling. He was not a mere nuisance, he was an institution, feared and tolerated in equal measure. Argus Filch, the caretaker, despised him, while Fred and George Weasley adored him as a kindred spirit in chaos. He could make the castle erupt in laughter or groans in seconds, and his unpredictability gave Hogwarts the feeling of being truly alive, full of danger and delight. In the books, Peeves's role is far from superficial comic relief. He represents rebellion, a reminder that even within strict traditions, mischief is part of the school's soul. When Dolores Umbridge takes control in Order of the Phoenix, she tries to impose her authoritarian order upon Hogwarts, banning laughter, rebellion, and individuality. But she meets her match in Peeves. Rowling writes that Peeves had never behaved so well for anyone in living memory as he did for Fred and George. When the twins unleash chaos to drive Umbridge out, Peeves joins the revolution with gusto. He sabotages her rules, dismantles furniture, and becomes a living protest. It's hard to imagine a more symbolic act than Peeves saluting Fred and George as they fly out of the castle. "Give her hell from us, Peeves." It was not just a prank, it was Hogwarts defending itself. The absence of this figure from the films fundamentally changes the tone of Hogwarts. In the cinematic version, the castle often feels cold and monumental, filled with awe but lacking mischief. Without Peeves, it loses a dimension of personality. We see ghosts like nearly headless Nick or moaning Myrtle, but they are static, figures of sadness, nostalgia, or comic awkwardness. Peeves, by contrast, is chaos personified. He is not tied to sorrow or the past, but to the sheer, living madness of magic. His removal stripped Hogwarts of its heartbeat, turning it from a living organism into a museum of stone and candlelight. The irony is that Peeves was not just planned for the first film, he was actually filmed. British comedian Rick Mayall, known for his anarchic energy in The Young Ones, was cast to play the poltergeist. Mayall later recounted that his scenes were shot over several days, full of manic humour and improvisation. "I did it. I was Peeves," he said in an interview years later. "But then they cut me out of the film. Kids would have loved it." The footage never appeared in any deleted scenes, and the decision to remove Peeves was reportedly made during editing. The official explanation was that his scenes disrupted pacing. Unofficially, it seems the filmmakers wanted to maintain a more serious tone. That choice, while understandable from a cinematic standpoint, came at a cost. The films gained grandeur but lost mischief. The book's Hogwarts is a place of extremes: danger balanced by comedy, fear followed by laughter. Peeves constantly undercut solemnity, making the castle feel unpredictable and real. Without him, Hogwarts becomes more gothic than magical. The sense that the walls themselves have a personality vanishes. When Harry sneaks through the corridors in the first movie, the tension is pure suspense. In the book, Peeves might suddenly appear humming, "Naughty, naughty, you'll get caughty," turning fear into absurdity. The films miss that duality, the absurd mingled with the terrifying. Peeves also acted as an emotional barometer. His pranks often reflected the atmosphere of the castle. When students felt oppressed, his mischief became open defiance. When they were joyful, he celebrated with louder noise. During the Deathly Hallows, while the castle turns into a fortress under siege, Peeves becomes a soldier of chaos. Rowling describes him in one of the book's most triumphant moments. Peeves swooped over the heads of Death Eaters, pelting them with Snargaluff pods, and sang, "Voldy's gone mouldy, so now let's have fun." It is a small but powerful scene, a spirit of laughter striking back against darkness. It shows that even the castle's ghosts reject tyranny. The films omit that completely, and with it, they lose a poetic statement. Even the mischief of children and the laughter of ghosts have power against evil. It's easy to overlook how deeply Peeves ties into the story's themes. The Harry Potter saga is, in many ways, about resistance to authority, conformity, and fear. Peeves is resistance in its purest form. He cannot be tamed, controlled, or reasoned with. Even Dumbledore, who can command dragons and diffuse conflicts with words, cannot entirely contain him. The only person Peeves obeys is the Bloody Baron, the most terrifying of the ghosts, a symbol of death and silence. This relationship is symbolic too. Only death can silence rebellion. In that sense, Peeves' chaos is not childish noise, it is life's defiance of stillness. From a production standpoint, Peeves was a logistical challenge. Visual effects in 2001 were still expensive and complex, and having a floating, translucent character interact physically with actors would have required time and money. Moreover, the first film already introduced several ghosts, Nick, Myrtle, the Grey Lady, and the creative team may have feared audience confusion. But while understandable, this reasoning flattens the magical diversity that Rowling built. In her Hogwarts, even the ghosts have personalities and politics. Peeves was not a spectral background figure. He was part of the castle's ecology, like the moving staircases and talking portraits. To remove him was to silence one of the castle's loudest inhabitants. In narrative terms, Peeves also served as contrast. Against his chaotic energy, the strictness of Filch and Umbridge becomes more menacing. Without him, their tyranny lacks an equal and opposite force. Imagine Order of the Phoenix without his sabotage. The castle feels oppressed, but we no longer feel the resistance bubbling from within its walls. Fred and George's fireworks feel like isolated rebellion rather than a full uprising. In the book, their departure triggers a chain reaction across Hogwarts, with Peeves turning the school itself into a weapon of prankish protest. That interplay gives the narrative rhythm. Authority rises, chaos answers. The films omit that rhythm, replacing it with linear seriousness. Even Rowling herself seemed aware of his symbolic weight. Peeves's name, derived from peeve, to irritate, signals his function as irritant, the grain of sand that makes the pearl. He provokes reactions that reveal others' true natures. Filch's fury exposes his bitterness. McGonagall's patience shows her quiet strength. Fred and George's friendship with him reveals their moral clarity, that humour and rebellion can be righteous. When Peeves vanishes from the screen, those nuances fade too. We see laughter, but we lose its purpose. The exclusion of Peeves also changes the emotional texture of Hogwarts' final battle. In the Deathly Hallows, every character, living or dead, joins the defence of the school. Centaurs shoot arrows from the forest, house elves charge with kitchen knives, and even ghosts rally to the cause. Peeves becomes a legend, haunting Death Eaters with his taunts and missiles. It's comic, yes, but also profoundly moving. It shows that the spirit of Hogwarts, irreverent, untamable, joyful, refuses to die. In the movie, that spiritual rebellion is missing. The battle is epic, but the soul of the castle feels strangely absent. The victory is physical, not emotional. There is an unintentional metaphor in his deletion. The filmmakers, seeking seriousness, removed the embodiment of laughter and chaos, just as the ministry in the books tried to suppress free thought. In a way, cinema mirrored Umbridge. The result is a Hogwarts that looks real, but feels less alive. The laughter was edited out, leaving only the echo of what once was. Rick Mayall, the man cast to play Peeves, himself a master of comedic rebellion, might have been the perfect spirit for the school. His absence is haunting in its own quiet way. The world of Harry Potter thrives on contrasts: light and darkness, order and chaos, sorrow and laughter. Peeves stood at the intersection of those forces, showing that chaos can be moral and laughter can be defiance. Without him, Hogwarts in film becomes a cathedral of order, where magic is solemn, not mischievous. In the books, every hallway feels alive because Peeves might be lurking behind the next corner, armed with ink bombs and limericks. His existence reminds us that the world of wizards is not only about power, and it's about play. Rick Mayall once joked that being cut from Harry Potter was the best job I never had. He was right in more ways than one. Peeves remains the ghost of what could have been. He's not just a missing character, but a missing emotion. Somewhere between the pages of Rowling's novels and the polished corridors of the films, the laughter of Hogwarts was silenced. And that silence, though beautiful, will never sound quite like magic. Number 19, Dumbledore and Grindelwald, hints that vanished. Severus Snape's cinematic version is perhaps one of the most striking examples of how the Harry Potter films reduced a character of immense psychological depth into a symbol, a dark, brooding enigma cloaked in mystery. The audience sees a man dressed in black, speaking in whispers, his emotions locked behind his sharp gaze. Yet those who read the books know that Snape was not born into shadows. He was driven there His tragedy was not only in love lost, but in a life that taught him to mistrust affection itself. The films merely hinted at that pain, showing fragments of a story that, in truth, was shaped by years of cruelty, loneliness, and an almost unbearable longing to belong somewhere. In J.K. Rowling's text, the early glimpses of Snape's life reveal a haunting landscape of neglect and fear. He was born in Spinner's End, a decaying industrial neighbourhood filled with soot and silence, to a Muggle father, Tobias Snape, and a witch mother, Eileen Prince. The book describes his home as a tiny, dark room with peeling wallpaper and the smell of damp. It was here that young Severus first learned the language of humiliation. Tobias was violent, bitter, and dismissive of both his wife and son, and the boy's first lessons in magic came not with wonder, but as acts of escape. Rowling gives readers the sense that Snape's coldness was not a choice, but a shield, a way of surviving in a place where affection was a luxury. The films chose not to show this. They began his story when it was already too late, when the scars had already hardened into armor. At Hogwarts, Snape was an outsider from his first day. The books show this through the eyes of Lily Evans, who was one of his only friends. He arrived with patched robes, greasy hair, and an awkward intensity that alienated him from others. He was lonely, very lonely, Rowling writes in The Prince's Tale. Yet in the films this aspect of his youth is compressed into seconds, a montage of glances and a single playground scene. The audience never sees the long years of ridicule that shaped his bitterness. James Potter, Sirius Black, and the rest of the marauders saw in him an easy target. Poor, awkward, half-dark, and made him their sport. The book Order of the Phoenix includes the infamous Snape's Worst Memory scene, where James levitates him upside down in front of everyone, exposing his underwear and calling him Snivelous. This humiliation, witnessed by Lily, shattered the only friendship that kept him tethered to something good. The films showed this memory but stripped it of its cruelty, turning it into a passing moment instead of the defining wound it truly was. That single act of mockery was not mere bullying, it was the catalyst for Snape's descent into darkness. In the books, Rowling allows readers to see the progression, the bitterness, the anger, the attraction to darker magic as a means to regain control. Snape's fascination with the dark arts was not born of evil but of desperation, a desire to be powerful enough never to be humiliated again. He found comfort in Slytherin's promise of superiority and in Voldemort's rhetoric of strength. "You don't understand what it's like to be the target," he once told Dumbledore in a deleted draft Rowling mentioned. That line, never spoken in the films, explains everything. The movie version of Snape seems drawn to darkness out of sheer temperament. The book version shows us a wounded boy seeking protection from a world that laughed at him. Snape's love for Lily, often reduced in the films to the single word, always, was far more complicated in the books. Rowling did not write a man frozen in romantic devotion. She wrote a man who never learned how to love properly because life had taught him only how to lose. His affection for Lily was pure in intention, but poisoned by insecurity. When she defended him from James, he responded with fury. When she tried to reach him, he pushed her away. The heartbreaking moment when he calls her mudblood is not just an insult. It's self-destruction. Rowling writes that his face was twisted, regret already flooding his eyes, but pride stopped him from apologizing. That pride, born of pain, is the axis of Snape's tragedy. The films presented their relationship as a tragic love story. The books showed it as a lifelong struggle between love and self-loathing. After Lily's death, Snape's life became a penance. In the Deathly Hallows, when Dumbledore demands, "You wish to return to the fold?" Snape replies, I wish to protect Lily Potter's son." That line is famous, but the book's internal description adds what the film omits. He could not bear the thought that the boy who had her eyes would die because of his mistake. His every cruel word to Harry was laced with guilt, his contempt masking the unbearable reminder of what he had destroyed. The films turned this into visual melancholy, Alan Rickman's quiet stares, his trembling hand. But without context, the viewer sees only restraint, not torment. The book lets us hear his thoughts, the film lets us see only his mask. Rowling never intended Snape to be a saint. He was vindictive, cruel, and capable of hatred, yet the books constantly force the reader to confront why. In The Half-Blood Prince, Harry reads his old potions book filled with sarcastic notes and dark spells, and Hermione scolds him, calling them dangerous. But through those scribbles we see Snape's intelligence, his rebellion against the system that never respected him. Sectum semper for enemies, he had written, not out of malice, but as an invention of a boy who had known too many enemies. The film glossed over this brilliant irony. The very curse Harry uses against Draco in A Weapon of Anger was born from Snape's own rage decades earlier. It was a mirror moment, a symbolic echo of what happens when pain goes unhealed. Dumbledore understood this. Their relationship in the books is built on uneasy respect and mutual manipulation. Dumbledore uses Snape's guilt as leverage. Snape uses Dumbledore's trust as a lifeline. In the books, their conversations drip with moral ambiguity. Dumbledore tells him, "You disgust me," after Snape reveals his motive is Lily alone, not goodness itself. Yet that disgust gives way to compassion. The film, however, portrays Dumbledore as serene and knowing, as though everything was predetermined. The book shows something rawer, a man exploiting another's broken heart for the sake of the greater good. It is an ethical wound the films never dared to open. Perhaps the most telling omission lies in the depiction of Snape's death. In the film he dies quickly, beautifully, his tears bottled in Harry's hand like silver pearls. In the book it is much harsher. He collapses on the floor of the shrieking shack, his breathing shallow, blood spilling faster than Harry can think. His final words are not poetic, but desperate. "Look, me." The text makes clear that he wanted, in his final moment, to see Lily's eyes once more, not as a gesture of eternal love, but as a dying man's last attempt at forgiveness. The simplicity of that wish, to die seen, not judged, is the heart of Snape's tragedy. The films made it romantic, the book made it human. Rowling's Severus Snape exists within the moral greyness of real life. He is not a hero in disguise, but a flawed man who does the right thing for the wrong reasons. When Harry later tells his son that Snape was probably the bravest man I ever knew, readers understand the weight of that sentence. It is not bravery born of courage, but of endurance. Snape endured a childhood of violence, years of rejection, and a lifetime of guilt, and still chose to protect the son of the man who had tormented him. The films show this only in glimpses. The books make you feel it every step of the way. The difference between book and film is ultimately the difference between empathy and aesthetics. The movie version of Snape is haunting, but it invites admiration rather than understanding. His silhouette becomes a symbol of mystery, his always a quote for fans to tattoo, stripped of the pain that gave it meaning. In contrast, the book makes you sit with his loneliness. You see the boy behind the black robes, the friend who betrayed, the man who repented too late. It is not just a story about love that never died, but about a soul that never healed. To understand Snape fully, one must see the complete arc. A poor child from a violent home, humiliated at school, seduced by ideology, destroyed by love, redeemed by duty. The films skip the first 3 stages and focus on the last 2, turning his story into a riddle instead of a confession. Rowling's Snape is all too human. The cinematic Snape is almost divine in his restraint. One bleeds, the other broods. And that distinction, subtle yet profound, is what makes the book's version unforgettable. When we read The Prince's Tale, we are not watching a man perform heroism. We are reading his soul unfold, messy and bitter and sincere. The flashbacks do not absolve him. They expose him. The films show Snape walking away into the fog. The books leave you standing beside his grave, wondering if, in some quiet corner of the afterlife, he finally found peace. That question, that ache, is what the camera could never capture, and what the page still whispers long after the story ends. Number 20. The too personal final battle. In J.K. Rowling's books, Fred and George Weasley are not just comic relief. They are a living embodiment of rebellion, wit, and that peculiar kind of teenage magic that made Hogwarts feel alive. Every prank they pulled carried meaning, every joke had the pulse of youth. The twins represented something essential, the spirit that refused to bow down to authority, even in a world where the stakes grew darker with every passing year. But when the story was brought to the screen, something vital was lost. The chaos, the laughter, the noise, all the things that made Fred and George unforgettable were reduced to fragments. In the films, their grand departure from Hogwarts, one of the most iconic moments in Order of the Phoenix, was trimmed down to a 20-second fireworks montage. It was beautiful, yes, but hollow, a spark without a fire. In the book, that scene is a full rebellion, a moment of glorious anarchy that tears through the oppressive silence of Dolores Umbridge's regime. Rowling paints it with energy and precision. Fred and George, humiliated and provoked one too many times by the new, tyrannical order, unleash pandemonium in the corridors. Fred and George turned to each other and said together, "Ready when you are." Then they raised their wands and shouted, "Actio brooms." The very air trembles as their broomsticks smash through the office window, and chaos reigns. Students cheer, spells misfire, fireworks explode in the shape of dragons and rockets, and Umbridge, the very symbol of control, can do nothing but stand frozen in fury. The text breathes with liberation, with the intoxicating sense that these two boys had just done something extraordinary. It's not simply a prank, it's defiance, it's resistance. The films, however, reduce this revolution to spectacle. Instead of tension and catharsis, we get a brief, choreographed light show. Fred and George soar through the great hall, laughing, fireworks burst behind them, and then silence. It's over almost before it begins. The visual is there, but the soul of the scene is gone. The camera never lingers on the terrified yet inspired faces of the students, never shows the chaos spreading through Umbridge's carefully ordered world. The twins don't get the moment of recognition, that final bow to their fellow students before disappearing into legend. It's as if the rebellion never truly happened. Rowling's Hogwarts was a living organism. Every corridor, every ghost, every laugh added texture to that world. Fred and George were its heartbeat. When they mocked Percy's seriousness, teased Ron, or tested new products from Weasley's wizard wheezes, the reader felt warmth and life in every corner of the castle. Their inventions, skiving snack boxes, portable swamps, and extendable ears, were symbols of creativity and resistance. They represented freedom in a system designed to control. When they finally opened their joke shop, It wasn't just a business. It was triumph born from chaos. "You don't think we're going to keep working for a living?" Fred quipped in the book, their laughter echoing with pride and mischief. But in the films, we never see that gradual build-up. There's no real sense of their genius, no montage of their growing defiance, no emotional arc from pranksters to freedom fighters. We glimpse them occasionally, a funny comment here, a smirk there. But their evolution is invisible. By the time they leave Hogwarts, it feels abrupt, unearned. The audience knows they're funny, but not why they matter. The irony is that the Weasley twins were the purest kind of rebellion in the story, rebellion through joy. They fought tyranny with laughter. That's not just comic relief. That's courage. In the book, their final act at Hogwarts is layered with symbolism. They don't fight back with violence. They don't shout or threaten. They create beauty. Dangerous, chaotic, uncontrollable beauty. Fred and George wheeled about to tumultuous applause and, bowing deeply to their fellow students, set off out of the doors and into the glorious sunset. That's poetry disguised as humor. It's an image of liberation that could have rivaled any dramatic duel in the series. But in the movie, that sunset lasts a few seconds. The camera cuts away before the audience can even process what has just happened. The loss is deeper than one scene. By minimizing the twins, the films unintentionally remove one of the emotional anchors of Hogwarts itself. The school in the movies often feels dark and cold, dominated by the conflicts of Harry and Voldemort. Without Fred and George's humor, the castle loses its mischief, its warmth. In the books, they're everywhere, sneaking into the kitchens, tormenting Filch, testing fireworks in the dormitory, or betting on Quidditch matches. They fill the world with life. Their energy spreads through every page like a spark that refuses to die out, even in times of fear. In the films, that light is dimmed. There's also an emotional thread the movies fail to capture. The silent understanding between the twins and Harry. Fred and George, despite their teasing, always stood by him. They were the first to accept him into the Burrow-like family, the first to mock the seriousness of the world around him, teaching him that laughter was its own kind of defense. In the fifth book, their rebellion mirrors Harry's own fight against Umbridge. Both battles are about freedom. In one fought with prophecy and risk, the other with fireworks and laughter. The film's version never draws this parallel. The twins' act becomes isolated, detached from the larger theme of resistance. Their departure from Hogwarts in the book is not only spectacle, it's character transformation. It's the moment they grow up. They choose their path, independent from the rules of both Hogwarts and the Ministry. It's the turning point that leads them toward Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, the shop that becomes a beacon of joy in dark times. In the films, that transformation feels incomplete. The shop appears suddenly in Half-Blood Prince, colourful and fun, but disconnected from their rebellion. The audience never witnesses the courage it took to reach that point. They never see the price of freedom. Rowling gave the twins layers the films never explored. Behind the laughter was pain, especially in Fred's case. The books quietly remind us that they understood the dangers of the world. They risked their lives at the Battle of the Seven Potters, fought bravely in the Battle of Hogwarts, and paid the ultimate price. Fred's death hit so hard precisely because of everything he stood for. He was joy personified, and joy was snuffed out in war. The film shows his death briefly, but without the weight of his life's spirit. The moment doesn't land. It feels like a footnote, not a tragedy. When Rowling described their fireworks display in Order of the Phoenix, she gave readers more than a scene. She gave them a philosophy. Fred and George's fireworks were of the most spectacular kind imaginable. Rockets that turned into dragons, sparklers that spelled rude words, and Catherine wheels that shot off in every direction. This wasn't chaos for chaos's sake. It was art. It was the Weasleys' declaration that laughter can be louder than fear. In contrast, the film's spectacle feels mechanical, a visual effect that forgets the emotion behind it. The difference lies in tone. The books let us feel the tension before the explosion, the suffocating atmosphere of Umbridge's rules, the frustration of the students, the quiet planning of the twins. When the rebellion erupts, it feels earned. The films, on the other hand, show the chaos without the build-up. It becomes a visual joke, not a revolution. The audience enjoys the colours but misses the catharsis. Without context, it's just noise. And it's a shame, because Fred and George's story deserved more space. They were inventors, dreamers, rebels, and brothers who loved the world enough to laugh in its darkest hour. Their humour wasn't a distraction from the war. It was defiance against it. They refused to let Voldemort's shadow extinguish their fire. That's why in the books their presence mattered so much. Every laugh was a victory. Every prank was a reminder that Hogwarts still belonged to its students, not its tyrants. By stripping away their depth, the films lose one of the story's most human elements, the idea that laughter can be resistance. In a world obsessed with destiny, Fred and George chose freedom. In a narrative filled with chosen ones and prophecies, they wrote their own story, one joke at a time. And maybe that's why their loss feels heavier on the page. Because in Rowling's world, laughter isn't just funny, it's sacred. It's the last defense against darkness, and the films, for all their visual splendor, forgot to let that laughter echo through the halls of Hogwarts. Number 21, the prophecy that lost its meaning. In the world of Harry Potter, few characters carry as much quiet tragedy as Albus Dumbledore. The books give us a man layered with brilliance, guilt, and the remnants of dreams that once bordered on dangerous. Yet in the films, that depth is stripped away, replaced with the image of a wise but aloof mentor. What the movies forgot, or perhaps chose to ignore, is the story that the Deathly Hallows revealed about the young Dumbledore and his fateful bond with Gellert Grindelwald. It was not just a friendship, it was a connection that defined his life, his shame, and his lifelong fear of power. In the Deathly Hallows, Rowling gives us a shock through the quill of Rita Skeeter, who releases her scandalous biography, The Life and Lies of Albus Dumbledore. In it, she writes about Dumbledore's teenage years in Godric's Hollow and his friendship with the brilliant but darkly ambitious Grindelwald. Skeeter's revelations tear apart the myth of the perfect headmaster. They say he dabbled in the dark arts with Grindelwald. They say they planned domination for the greater good, she writes. For the first time, the reader sees Dumbledore not as a distant hero, but as a flawed human being who once believed that wizards should rule over muggles. That single phrase, for the greater good, became Grindelwald's slogan and a stain on Dumbledore's conscience forever. This backstory transforms everything we thought we knew about him. The Dumbledore from the early books, the calm, all-knowing, slightly whimsical headmaster, was once a young man blinded by dreams of a better world. Rowling's narrative in the book hints that Dumbledore's intelligence was both his gift and his curse. He wanted to use power for good, but underestimated how easily ideals can twist into tyranny. His friendship with Grindelwald was not just intellectual, it was emotional, almost magnetic. Together they imagined a new world order, but one built on control and superiority. When Ariana, Dumbledore's fragile younger sister, was killed during a duel between Albus, Aberforth and Grindelwald, everything shattered. That moment broke him, and he carried that wound into every act of his later life. In the book, Rowling allows us to feel the weight of that guilt. Dumbledore confesses to Harry, "I was gifted, I was brilliant, I wanted to escape, I wanted to shine, I wanted glory." It is one of the most vulnerable lines in the entire series. Here stands the man who defeated Grindelwald, who mentored the boy who lived, admitting that once he was no better than the man he later stopped. This confession reframes Dumbledore's every decision, his reluctance to take positions of authority, his avoidance of the ministry, even his hesitation to act directly against Voldemort, all stem from the fear that power might corrupt him again. The films, however, barely touch this core. The cinematic Dumbledore remains mostly unchanged from start to finish. His complexity, his youthful arrogance, and his emotional bond with Grindelwald are all condensed into a brief exchange with Aberforth in The Deathly Hallows, Part 2. The moment passes quickly, with a single mention of Ariana's death and no exploration of Dumbledore's moral collapse. The audience never feels the inner torment that shaped his choices. His past becomes a background detail instead of the haunting revelation it was in the book. What could have been a moment of truth becomes an afterthought. When Rowling's text reveals that Dumbledore was once close to Grindelwald, it is not only a plot twist but a moral mirror. It shows that even the wisest among us are capable of dangerous mistakes. Their friendship was a warning about how idealism can blind people to cruelty. Grindelwald's charisma and Dumbledore's intellect formed a partnership too powerful for either to control. Yet in the films, this relationship is mentioned so briefly that its gravity disappears. There is no sense of betrayal, no moral reckoning. Viewers see Dumbledore as merely regretful, not broken. In the book, Harry learns about Dumbledore's past not through exposition, but through doubt. As he reads Skeeter's book and visits Bathilda Bagshot's ruined home, he begins to question the man he once trusted completely. "I trusted Dumbledore. I thought he cared about me," Harry tells himself, his faith shaken. Rowling uses this tension to blur the line between hero and human. Dumbledore's silence becomes an act of shame. He never told Harry the full story because he feared losing his image of perfection. That conflict gives the Deathly Hallows its emotional backbone. Faith tested, loyalty strained, truth revealed too late. In contrast, the films avoid this moral dissonance. Harry never truly doubts Dumbledore. Their relationship remains stable, sentimental, and safe. The revelation of Dumbledore's youthful ambition, his alliance with Grindelwald, and Ariana's tragic death should have made him a mirror of Voldemort, a man tempted by power who chose to turn away. Instead, moviegoers get only fragments, scenes so brief they vanish before meaning can settle. Without this context, Dumbledore becomes a symbol of wisdom rather than a survivor of guilt. The omission matters because Dumbledore's past defines his present. His compassion, his trust in love, his refusal to lead the ministry all come from the shadow of that youthful arrogance. Rowling shows us a man who learned that moral certainty can be as dangerous as evil itself. "Do not pity the dead, Harry, pity the living, and above all, those who live without love," he says at King's Cross, echoing the lesson he learned too late. His life is not a triumph of goodness, but an act of repentance. Without the Grindelwald story, that redemption arc dissolves. The films, by simplifying him, rob the story of one of its richest moral themes. that redemption requires honesty about one's sins. In the Fantastic Beasts films, we finally see a younger Dumbledore and his relationship with Grindelwald brought to life, yet it feels disconnected from the man we meet in Harry Potter. The emotional through line between the two eras remains faint. Jude Law's portrayal adds nuance, but it arrives decades too late to repair what the original movies erased. The Dumbledore who confesses to Harry about Ariana's death and his lust for power never truly exists on screen. We get flashes of guilt, but not the long road of penance that defined him in the books. Rowling's literary Dumbledore is almost Shakespearean, a tragic figure who spends his life trying to undo the consequences of one youthful dream. In the book's climax, when he begs Snape to kill him, his request is not only strategic, but deeply symbolic. He sees death as the only release from guilt. "I am not afraid, Severus. It is the fate I deserve," he says. That line exposes his core, a man who no longer seeks victory, but peace from his own conscience. The films keep the same moment but lose the years of remorse behind it. Without the Grindelwald backstory, his death becomes a tactical decision, not the culmination of a lifetime of regret. Even small details in the books reveal Dumbledore's burden. He keeps the Elder Wand, the very symbol of power he once craved. He refuses to use it for domination, keeping it as both tool and warning. He hides his family's past, avoids political positions, and isolates himself from intimacy, all signs of a man terrified of repeating history. The film versions overlook these hints, reducing Dumbledore's solitude to eccentricity rather than trauma. Viewers never learn that every act of mentorship, every piece of advice to Harry, comes from the pain of a man who once believed he could shape destiny. There is a striking irony in how the films handle this omission. They simplify Dumbledore's character to preserve his heroic aura, yet the books make him even more admirable because of his flaws. His greatness lies in self-awareness, not perfection. When he tells Harry that power was my weakness and my temptation, it is not a confession of defeat, but a lesson in humility. The films, in their quest for clarity, deny audiences that complexity. They turn tragedy into virtue, confession into wisdom, and pain into silence. Had the films included more of this backstory, Dumbledore's mentorship of Harry would have carried deeper emotional weight. Both men were haunted by the past, defined by choices that cost lives. Their bond, built on the shared experience of guilt and forgiveness, could have been the emotional core of the series finale. Instead, the final confrontation focuses on Voldemort's downfall rather than Dumbledore's redemption. A generation of moviegoers met a headmaster, but not the man who once dreamed of ruling the world and spent a lifetime fearing that dream's return. The absence of Grindelwald's shadow from the Harry Potter films reshaped the moral landscape of the story. It turned a saga about temptation and redemption into one about good versus evil. In the books, Dumbledore's fall mirrors Voldemort's rise, showing how both sprang from the same desire to impose order on chaos. The difference was that one learned mercy. Without that mirror, the films lose the philosophical heart of Rowling's tale that love redeems, but only through the acknowledgement of failure. So love. In the end, the books give us a Dumbledore who is both mentor and penitent. The man behind the twinkling eyes and cryptic phrases is haunted by a single summer in Godric's Hollow, by the friendship that destroyed his family, and the ideology that nearly destroyed his soul. The films give us a figure of light without shadow, a saint without sin, and yet it was in the darkness of his past that the true meaning of his wisdom was born, a truth that the movies, in their haste for heroism, left buried among the ashes of Ariana's grave. Number 22. The Power of Lily's Sacrifice. In the pages of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, the final confrontation between Harry and Lord Voldemort unfolds not as a cinematic explosion of light and fury, but as a quiet, inevitable reckoning. The air in the great hall is still thick with the echoes of battle, the floor littered with debris and fallen wands. The war is ending, but the true victory has not yet been claimed. When Harry steps forward to face Tom Riddle for the last time, it is not the act of a warrior seeking revenge, but of a man who finally understands the meaning of sacrifice. He has already faced death, walked willingly into it, and returned not to destroy but to end a cycle of hate. The book's tone in that moment is almost subdued, a stark contrast to the cinematic blaze that would later define it. Rowling crafts it with restraint, as though mercy itself becomes the weapon that ends the war. Harry's voice in that scene is calm and almost sorrowful. When he calls Voldemort by his true name, Tom Riddle, the words pierce deeper than any spell. It is not an insult. It is a reminder. The boy who once sought immortality through fear and death is stripped of all grandeur. "Try for some remorse, Tom," Harry says in the book. "Be a man. Try." Those words strike at the heart of what separates them. Voldemort has spent his entire existence denying humanity, believing love to be weakness. Yet in this moment, Harry stands unarmed except for that very thing, compassion. His victory lies in refusing to become the mirror image of the monster he opposes. The narrative pauses, lingering on. The silence between them making the reader feel the weight of that choice. It is a moment of spiritual triumph disguised as confrontation. The film, however, transforms this moral duel into something entirely different. It takes place not in the Great Hall surrounded by witnesses, but in the chaos outside Hogwarts, with the castle crumbling and the sky aflame. Instead of a crowd watching the final fall of a tyrant, the duel is isolated and physical, Harry and Voldemort locked in a violent struggle that tears through stone corridors and ends with both of them tumbling off a ledge. The visual spectacle is impressive, the special effects grand, but the emotional resonance is diluted. What in the book was an appeal to conscience becomes in the film a clash of raw power. The moral dimension vanishes beneath the roar of collapsing towers and the flash of green and red light. Rowling's final battle is written like a meditation on mortality. Voldemort's death is almost anticlimactic, described with chilling simplicity. Voldemort fell backward, arms splayed, the slit pupils of the scarlet eyes rolling upward. Tom Riddle hit the floor with a mundane finality. There is no explosion, no disintegration. He dies like any man, his body heavy and unremarkable. The author deliberately strips away the mystique, reducing the Dark Lord to what he truly is: mortal. That ordinary fall is the ultimate punishment for a being who built his empire on the illusion of immortality. It reminds the reader that evil, however grand it appears, ends in dust and silence. In the film adaptation, this quiet inevitability is replaced with visual poetry. Voldemort's body dissolves into ash, his face crumbling into the wind. The scene is undeniably beautiful, but in that beauty lies the betrayal of the book's message. By allowing Voldemort to vanish without a trace, the film grants him what he always wanted: to be something more than human, to leave behind no corpse, no evidence of mortality. The book denies him that satisfaction, the film restores it. The audience is left with spectacle, but the moral conclusion, that evil dies an ordinary death, is lost in the smoke. The Great Hall in the book becomes a place of collective witness. Harry's refusal to kill Voldemort is not a private decision. It unfolds before the eyes of everyone who suffered under his reign. The Weasleys, the Order, the surviving students. They see not just the fall of a tyrant, but the vindication of the values they fought for. Harry's appeal for Voldemort's remorse is a public act of moral courage. Even in victory, he offers redemption. In contrast, the film removes the audience. No one sees Harry's act of mercy. There are no witnesses to the moral lesson. When the battle ends, Harry simply walks away, and the scene shifts abruptly to the future, leaving behind a sense of emotional emptiness where moral reflection should have been. In the book, Rowling constructs the final duel as a culmination of everything Harry has learned about life, death, and power. The Elder Wand, the Deathly Hallows, the Horcruxes, all these threads converge not in an explosion, but in understanding. Harry realizes that mastery over death is not achieved by conquering it, but by accepting it. "You're the one who killed yourself," he tells Voldemort. It is not bravado, but truth. The killing curse rebounds because it was cast by a man who never understood the simplest truth. Love protects, while hate destroys its master. This philosophical underpinning gives the scene depth far beyond the conventions of fantasy combat. The film, directed by David Yates, opts instead for visceral energy. Ralph Fiennes and Daniel Radcliffe deliver a duel filled with motion and fury, their wands locked in an epic beam of energy. They circle each other, the camera spinning with them, as if the entire world revolves around their struggle. It is thrilling, but it shifts the meaning of victory. The focus is no longer on Harry's refusal to kill, but on his physical triumph. The act of mercy is gone, replaced by an explosion that feels like any other cinematic climax. The moral gravity dissolves in the light. The simplicity of Voldemort's death in the book mirrors Dumbledore's lessons about death throughout the series. Dumbledore had told Harry that to the well-organized mind, death is but the next great adventure. Voldemort's inability to accept that truth is what destroys him. The scene in the Great Hall is the final manifestation of that philosophy. Death is not a spectacle, it is a release. Rowling's writing treats it with reverence, not fear. The contrast between Harry's calmness and Voldemort's panic encapsulates the entire moral architecture of the series. The boy who once feared death now accepts it, while the man who sought to evade it meets it unprepared. Even the setting carries symbolic weight. The Great Hall, where the first-year students were once sorted under the enchanted ceiling, becomes the site of Voldemort's end. The place that represented unity and learning is where evil collapses. In the film, this symbolism is diluted by constant movement. The duel sprawls across the castle, from rooftops to courtyards, as if the director feared stillness. Yet, in literature, stillness can be powerful. The Great Hall's silence after Voldemort's fall is more haunting than any explosion could be. It is the silence of peace returning. The book's Harry emerges from the battle unchanged by vengeance. When he explains to Ron and Hermione that the Elder Wand will be returned to Dumbledore's tomb, he rejects the temptation of power. "I'll put it back where it came from. It's too dangerous," he says. This decision underscores his moral evolution. The war ends not because Harry destroys his enemy, but because he ends the desire for domination that caused the war in the first place. The film touches on this moment but rushes through it, the focus shifting quickly to the epilogue. The audience is given closure, but not reflection. What Rowling achieved in prose was the rare blending of myth and morality. She transformed the archetype of the hero's final battle into a lesson about forgiveness and humanity. Harry's refusal to kill Voldemort echoes themes from throughout the series: his mother's sacrifice, Dumbledore's wisdom, Snape's redemption. The film, by prioritizing visual catharsis, loses the interconnectedness of those threads. It delivers excitement, but not enlightenment. The audience sees victory, but not the cost of it. When readers close the final book, they do not remember a battle of spells. They remember Harry's voice calling Voldemort by his true name, his quiet appeal to remorse, his calm acceptance of mortality. The emotional resonance of that moment lingers precisely because it is understated. Evil is defeated not by force but by understanding. The film's volcanic finale, while visually arresting, reduces that to a struggle of good versus evil in its simplest form. The nuance, the idea that compassion can triumph where violence cannot, is swallowed by spectacle. The contrast between book and film reflects a larger truth about adaptation. Cinema thrives on visual power. Literature thrives on inner transformation. Rowling's Voldemort dies in the world of meaning, while Yeats's Voldemort dies in the world of motion. One leaves behind silence, the other smoke. Both are memorable, but only one carries the weight of moral victory. The quiet fall of Tom Riddle reminds us that even the darkest soul is still human, and that in the end, death is not to be conquered, but accepted. The film, in turning that lesson into fireworks, gives us a finale. But the book gives us an ending. Number 23, Horcruxes without logic. In the Order of the Phoenix, everything turns around a single mystery, the prophecy that sealed Harry Potter's fate long before he could even speak. In the book, J.K. Rowling gives it a deep, almost philosophical weight. "Neither can live while the other survives," says Sybil Trelawney's trembling voice from Dumbledore's memory. It's a line that carries the chill of inevitability, yet hides a paradox of choice. The prophecy doesn't force destiny, it simply predicts a possibility. Voldemort's own fear makes it real. He hears half of it and acts upon it, choosing to kill a child he believes to be his future enemy. And by doing so, he creates the very thing he feared most. That's the cruel irony Rowling wanted readers to see. Evil often forges its own downfall. But in the film version of The Order of the Phoenix, this entire philosophical core disappears under visual spectacle. The prophecy, which in the book is a fragile truth hidden within layers of meaning, becomes a glowing ball in a dusty hall. Harry holds it for a moment. Lucius Malfoy demands it. Then it shatters, leaving the viewer no wiser than before. The audience never learns what the prophecy actually says, nor why it matters. What was meant to be the story's turning point becomes mere decoration. Without context, the Hall of Prophecies is just another battlefield, not the place where the truth about destiny and choice collides. In Rowling's writing, the prophecy scene was never meant to be about action. It was about revelation, about what it means to be chosen and what it means to choose. After the battle, in the Department of Mysteries, Harry sits in Dumbledore's office, trembling with grief over Sirius's death. Dumbledore explains that the prophecy only had power because Voldemort believed in it. It was, however, the other part of the prophecy that was significant, Dumbledore says gently. And either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. But then he adds something crucial that the film omits entirely. It means that it is the value of your choices, far more than your abilities, that shows who you truly are. This single conversation defines not just the book, but the entire saga. The film version, directed by David Yates, trades all that weight for a few seconds of glowing glass and shouting, "Death Eaters." It's ironic because the book's most powerful moment isn't in the action at all, it's in silence. In the way Harry listens as Dumbledore confesses he had avoided telling him the truth for years. the boy's anger, the mentor's guilt, the terrible clarity that Voldemort's own decision bound them together forever. That's where the story reaches emotional maturity. Yet in the film, this is condensed into a few vague sentences and an awkward camera cut. The depth evaporates. Rowling made the prophecy a reflection of human psychology. Voldemort, obsessed with control, hears a fragment of a prediction and tries to master fate itself. By choosing to attack Harry, he unconsciously marks him as his equal, the one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord. The prophecy becomes self-fulfilling, but only because Voldemort acts upon it. In the book, Dumbledore insists that if Voldemort had ignored the prophecy, it would have remained meaningless words. "Do you think every prophecy in the Hall of Prophecy has been fulfilled?" he asks Harry. "No, they have not. It is the choices that make the difference." It's an extraordinary philosophical idea. Fate exists, but only as potential. The film, sadly, gives no trace of this nuance or Instead, moviegoers get a visually spectacular but emotionally hollow sequence. The shelves collapse, the glass orbs rain down, and the Order members duel in slow motion. The Hall of Prophecies glows like a futuristic cathedral, but what's missing is its heart. The prophecy itself, that mysterious voice, that moral puzzle, is never heard in full. We see Harry's shocked face, but we never feel the existential weight of what he has learned. The prophecy, stripped of meaning, becomes a MacGuffin, an object that drives the plot without deepening it. When Dumbledore finally speaks with Harry near the end of the film, it's a short and strangely flat scene. The book's emotional crescendo, Harry smashing objects in fury, shouting at Dumbledore for hiding the truth, the raw confession that it's all my fault, becomes a quiet, polite talk in the movie. The filmmakers seem afraid of the philosophy Rowling injected into her story. The confrontation between free will and destiny is replaced with a vague statement about the power of love. Of course, love is important in the series, but in the book, love and choice are intertwined. Dumbledore's real message is that love is a choice, not an automatic virtue. By removing that layer, the film turns Harry's moral awakening into a sentimental cliché. Rowling designed the prophecy to challenge Voldemort's worldview. He believes in control, in mastery over death, in the elimination of uncertainty. The prophecy exposes the flaw in that logic. By trying to control the future, he destroys it. In contrast, Dumbledore teaches Harry that real strength lies in accepting the unknown. The scene in the book where Dumbledore says, "It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities," becomes the moral axis of the entire saga. Yet Yates's film leaves this message floating somewhere in the background, never articulated, never explored. It's easy to understand why the filmmakers made this decision. The Order of the Phoenix is a long, dense novel filled with politics, prophecy, and internal struggle. Turning it into a 2-hour film meant sacrifices, but what they chose to cut reveals a misunderstanding of what made Rowling's work resonate. The battle scenes and the prophecy orb are visually gripping, but the meaning, the idea that evil is not destiny but a chain of choices, vanishes. The prophecy is no longer the story's mirror of human nature. It's a prop. The absence of context in the film also weakens the entire series arc. Without understanding that Voldemort chose Harry, the final confrontation in Deathly Hallows loses part of its emotional logic. The viewer never fully grasps why Harry can say with such conviction, "You'll never know love or friendship, and I feel sorry for you." In the book, that line comes from understanding how Voldemort's decisions defined both of them. In the film, it sounds noble but vague. The thread that connects the prophecy to Harry's self-understanding has been cut. What's even more curious is how the visual symbolism contradicts the book's message. The prophecy ball, glowing with mysterious light, suggests that fate is an object, something external that can be found, touched, or destroyed. In Rowling's world, however, the prophecy is an idea, a reflection of human fear and choice. When the orb shatters in the movie, nothing changes. But in the book, when the glass sphere breaks, it symbolizes liberation, the destruction of false inevitability. Harry realizes that he is not bound by destiny, that it's his decisions, not words on a prophecy, that matter. The film completely misses this transformation. It's worth remembering how deeply Rowling tied this concept to the rest of the series. The prophecy is not just about Harry and Voldemort, it echoes the choices of every major character. Snape's guilt, Lily's sacrifice, even Neville Longbottom's quiet courage, all stem from the idea that choice defines fate. It could have been Neville, Dumbledore tells Harry in the book, but Voldemort chose you. That single detail adds layers of irony and tragedy. 2 babies born in July, 2 potential saviors, but only one chosen by fear. In the movie, this is reduced to a passing mention, if at all. The idea that Neville's life might have been entirely different, or that Voldemort's choice shaped both destinies, never surfaces. The emotional climax of the book is Harry's acceptance of his role, not as a victim of fate, but as a conscious participant. His grief for Sirius merges with the understanding that his own freedom will always be bound to responsibility. "Does this mean," he asks Dumbledore, "that one of us has got to kill the other in the end?" And Dumbledore answers, "Yes." But even then, the weight of the moment lies not in doom, but in choice. Harry doesn't collapse under prophecy. He rises because he chooses to continue. The movie glosses over this, presenting him as merely saddened, not transformed. What remains is a strange emptiness. The prophecy that should have been the moral spine of the Order of the Phoenix becomes an accessory to visual drama. Without its philosophical context, the entire narrative of fate and freedom loses coherence. The films that follow, especially Half-Blood Prince and Deathly Hallows, struggle to recover that lost meaning. Viewers see Harry as the chosen one, but never understand why. In the books, the answer is painfully simple. He was chosen because Voldemort made the choice, and Harry's strength lies in choosing differently. That's why the difference between book and film matters so much. The prophecy was never about predicting the future. It was about defining what kind of person one becomes when faced with it. Rowling's words carried that quiet moral thunder, the idea that destiny is a mirror reflecting our own actions. The movie, however, turned that mirror into shattered glass, and in doing so lost the reflection entirely. Number 24, Voldemort, Fear versus Madness. In the films, the moment Lily Potter stands before Voldemort is a flash of light, a scream, and then silence. The story moves on as if her death were just another tragic event, one more reason to pity the boy who lived. But in the books, that scene is the very heart of everything. Lily's choice, her act of love, becomes the foundation of all that follows, a form of ancient, wordless magic that transcends the spells and charms taught at Hogwarts. When Dumbledore later explains this to Harry, he calls it the deepest kind of magic, one that Voldemort, in all his power, could never comprehend. This is not merely about survival, it is about the triumph of love over death itself. The films never pause long enough to let that truth settle. They show the visual spectacle of a killing curse, the baby's cry, and then the scar that defines Harry's life. But they skip the essential moral weight of Lily's act, the voluntary nature of her sacrifice. In J.K. Rowling's writing, That choice is everything. It is not the blood relation alone that creates the protection. It is the choice to die when one might have lived. Lily was given the option to stand aside, to let Voldemort kill her child and survive herself. She refused. That decision, to die without resistance, purely to save another, wove an ancient spell around Harry, older than magic itself. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Dumbledore tells Harry, "Your mother died to save you. If there is one thing Voldemort cannot understand, it is love." These words are deceptively simple, yet they contain the entire emotional philosophy of the saga. Voldemort, the ultimate seeker of immortality, believes death is the enemy to be conquered. Lily, in contrast, embraces death out of love. This is the paradox that breaks the Dark Lord's power. Her death was not a defeat, but an act of creation. It forged a protection so pure that when Voldemort's curse struck, it rebounded upon him, destroying his physical body. The movies reduced that act to something passive, a mother dying to protect her child. But Rowling's version is much more active. Lily's death is an invocation of the oldest force in the wizarding world, one that requires no wand, no words, and no training. It is willpower made divine. It's important to remember that magic in the Harry Potter universe is not simply about power, it's about intention. A spell can only do what the wizard truly means it to do, and Lily's intention was pure protection, pure love. That is why her magic lingered for years in Harry's very blood. When Voldemort returned to power and used Harry's blood to rebuild his body in the Goblet of Fire, Dumbledore explained that Voldemort had unwittingly preserved that same protective enchantment. "He took your blood," Dumbledore said, "and in doing so he tethered himself to you." The films mention this only briefly, but in the book, it's a chilling revelation. Voldemort's attempt to overcome the magic of love only bound him to it more tightly. The very force he despised became the reason he could not truly destroy Harry. This irony is lost in the cinematic retelling, where the moral layers are replaced by visual grandeur. Rowling's narrative builds a kind of theological argument within a fantasy world. Magic is not neutral, it carries moral weight. When Harry later chooses to sacrifice himself in the Deathly Hallows, he repeats his mother's act. He walks into the forest knowing he will die, and that voluntary death spreads the same protection over everyone he loves. This mirrors Lily's original choice and completes the moral circle of the story. The magic of love, therefore, is not a one-time miracle, but a living principle, an inheritance of the heart. The films, however, show Harry's sacrifice as a dramatic gesture rather than a mystical echo of his mother's power. When we look closely at Rowling's description of Lily's protection, it has the resonance of myth. It recalls the old magic in folklore, where a mother's love could hold back the darkness, or where the willing heart of one could save many. Dumbledore's words in The Order of the Phoenix make this explicit. It was agony to touch someone marked by such love. When Voldemort possesses Harry in the Ministry of Magic, he cannot bear the emotions within him, grief, love, compassion, and flees from Harry's body. It's not magic in the technical sense, it's metaphysical purity. Harry's survival and later his strength come from something the Dark Lord cannot replicate. This is the difference between power and grace. The films largely treat love as sentiment. There is no time given to explore why Voldemort's touch burned when he tried to seize Harry as a child, or why Quirrell crumbled to ashes in the first book's climax. In the movie, it's just another special effect, a man screaming as he disintegrates. But in the book, that moment is revelation. Harry's skin becomes lethal to evil because it carries the mark of love. He could not touch you for years, Dumbledore tells him. It was agony to touch a person marked by something so good. The power Lily left behind was not metaphorical, it was real, tangible, embodied in her son's very flesh. This makes the story of Harry Potter less about destiny and more about moral inheritance. The films portray him as the chosen one, but the books suggest he was the loved one. His power was not chosen for him, but given through an act of compassion. The scar is not a mark of fate, but of love's survival. In that sense, Lily's magic becomes the philosophical backbone of the entire saga. Every time Harry chooses empathy over hatred, he channels that same ancient power. When he spares Peter Pettigrew's life, when he refuses to kill Draco Malfoy, when he offers Voldemort a chance to repent, all these moments echo the night in Godric's Hollow.